Why did everyone fall silent when she stepped off the bus? The morning air was cold, sharp with salt from the nearby ocean. A line of new recruits stumbled out behind her, their boots thudding on the concrete. Engines idled, drill sergeants barked orders, and somewhere in the distance, gulls screamed over the shoreline. But Sarah Martinez barely heard any of it. She was staring at the gates, heavy steel, flanked by the words, Naval Special Warfare Training Center. This was the place she had dreamed about for years. And now that she was here, her heart was beating too loud for her own comfort. 24 years old, a Navy communications specialist, older than most of the recruits. She looked calm, collected, but inside every nerve burned. Move it, move it, move it. The drill sergeant's voice cut through the noise. You've got 30 seconds to grab your gear and form a line. Sarah shouldered her duffel and joined the surge of bodies. Around her, recruits tripped, cursed, fumbled. A tall one, broad shoulders, easy grin, looked at her sideways. The name patch on his chest read Thompson. You sure you're in the right place, sweetheart? He muttered. She didn't answer, just took her place in formation, eyes front. Years in the Navy had taught her that silence could say more than 1,000 retorts. Let them think what they wanted. Words didn't prove anything. Actions did. The sergeant walked the line, his boots crunching over gravel. Scars ran across his forearms like faded road maps, the kind that made younger recruits stand straighter without knowing why. Look around you, he said. Most of you won't make it through the week. This isn't your typical boot camp. This is hell dressed in regulation uniform. You'll be pushed past what you think is possible. And when you think you've got nothing left, that's when we find out who you really are. Sarah listened, her jaw set. She'd waited 3 years for this chance. Every late-night run, every extra rep, every time she'd been told you're not built for special ops, it all led here. That afternoon, they ran fitness assessments in the dry heat. Push-ups, sprints, loaded carries, rope climbs. Most recruits gasped for air, shoulders trembling by the end. Sarah didn't. Her movements were sharp, controlled, precise. When her stopwatch time flashed on the board, a mile in under 7 minutes, a few heads turned. She noticed the surprise, not approval, just shock. But surprise wasn't the same as respect. In the mess hall later, she sat alone with her tray, rice, overcooked chicken, a scoop of vegetables that looked like they'd been boiled for hours. Around her, the noise of laughter and inside jokes filled the room. Most of the guys clustered together. Glances shot her way. She caught snippets. Bet she doesn't last a month. They just let anyone in these days. She kept eating, slow and deliberate, like every bite was part of her training. Then a soft voice broke through the noise. Mind if I sit here? Sarah looked up. Another recruit, younger, maybe 21, short blonde hair, green eyes that didn't hide their exhaustion. Her tag read K. Johnson. Sure, Sarah said. I'm Kelly, the woman said, sliding onto the bench with a grin. Saw you at the PT test. You made that look easy. Sarah took a sip of water. It gets easier with practice. Kelly laughed, shaking her head. I hope so. I thought I was fit until today. Then quieter, some of the guys are already making bets on who's gonna wash out first. Sarah didn't even flinch. Let them bet. Their opinions won't decide who finishes. Kelly gave her a long look, curious, maybe admiring, before nodding. Fair enough. That night the barracks hummed with restless energy. Sarah lay on her bunk, hands folded behind her head, listening to muffled conversations. Her name floated in the dark more than once. Martinez, followed by laughter. She smiled to herself. Let them talk. Tomorrow would be worse. It always got worse before it got better. The second day proved her right. The instructors introduced team exercises, heavy gear, obstacle courses, teamwork drills. Sarah's group included Thompson and 5 others. Their assignment: haul ammunition crates across an obstacle field. All right, Princess, Thompson said, tossing her a smaller pack. We don't want you slowing us down, take the light one. Sarah ignored him. grabbed one of the heaviest loads, close to 60 pounds, and shouldered it without a sound. Mud splattered up her boots as they crawled under wire, climbed walls, slogged through trenches. She stayed near the front, moving with quiet rhythm. When a younger recruit, Phillips, barely 20, started to falter, she shifted closer. "Switch with me," she said. "I can handle it," he wheezed. "I know, but we're a team." Thompson rolled his eyes from behind. Babysitting now, Martinez, cute. Sarah didn't answer, she just kept moving. By the time they finished, her arms were trembling, lungs burning, but she was still upright, still steady. From across the course, the drill sergeant watched her, scribbling notes on a clipboard. His face didn't change, but his eyes followed her longer than anyone else. That night when she lay down in the barracks again, Sarah knew two things. She'd survived the first cut, and she'd drawn attention, both the kind that opened doors and the kind that made enemies. The third day, small things began to go wrong. Her gear was never quite where she'd left it. Her water bottle went missing halfway through a march. Once, her bootlaces were tied together when she reached the locker. Nothing big enough to report, just enough to chip at her focus. She didn't need to guess who was behind it. Thompson's smirk during drills said enough. During rope climbs, he called out, "Don't worry, Martinez. Take your time, we'll wait." Loud enough for the instructors to hear, but with a mocking tone that only the recruits could catch. She reached the top of the rope anyway, muscles burning, and stared down at him before dropping to the ground with perfect form. Lunch came. She sat alone again, same table, same silence. The laughter nearby was sharper now, intentional. "You know what I heard," one recruit said loudly. "Women aren't built for this. Bone density, muscle fiber, science stuff." Thompson leaned back in his chair. "Yeah, makes sense. Explains why we keep slowing down." Sarah didn't even look up from her tray. She had learned long ago, the most devastating response to ignorance was competence. Later that evening, Kelly caught up to her after an obstacle course run. "Are you okay?" she asked, out of breath. "I saw what happened back there. Thompson tripped you on the wall." "What happened," Sarah said evenly, "was that we completed the course." "Sarah, that's not. It doesn't matter. Complaining won't make me stronger. Getting past it will." Kelly frowned. "How do you stay that calm?" Sarah looked at her, expression unreadable. "Because they're showing me who they are, and they don't realize I'm watching too." That night her compass was tampered with during a navigation exercise. She got lost in the dark for hours, mud up to her knees, stars barely visible through clouds. She returned last, exhausted, freezing, but she hadn't quit. When the drill sergeant checked her broken compass, his brow furrowed. "This needle's bent," he said. "You know who did it?" "No, Sergeant." He studied her a moment. "You know Martinez pressure makes diamonds or dust. You're deciding which you'll be right now." "Yes, Sergeant." She didn't sleep much that night. The days blurred: early runs, weight drills, cold swims, weapon handling, tactical coordination. And with each new challenge, the harassment evolved. Her rifle failed inspection because someone had loosened internal parts. Her pack straps were cut halfway through a march. She fixed everything in silence. But even silence has limits. The breaking point came during a team problem-solving exercise, a simulated rescue mission. Thompson was assigned team leader. He deliberately ignored her suggestions during planning. When the mission failed, he raised his voice for everyone to hear. "If certain people stayed in their lane, maybe we'd have succeeded." Sarah didn't respond, but she saw Sergeant Rodriguez writing something again on that clipboard. That night she lay awake staring at the ceiling, jaw tight. She thought of her father, Gunnery Sergeant Roberto Martinez, the Marine who'd never come home from Afghanistan. She remembered standing beside his flag-draped casket when she was 15, too young to understand sacrifice but old enough to feel its weight. She had promised him that day, "I'll make you proud. I'll carry your name into the field." Slowly, she rolled up her sleeve. There it was, the tattoo. A Marine Corps eagle, globe, and anchor entwined with a Navy insignia, names, dates, coordinates. At the center, a single line that defined her life. Gunnery Sergeant Roberto Martinez, KIA, Afghanistan, 2011. She ran her fingers over the ink, a quiet ritual. No one here knew what it meant. No one knew that the fire they were trying to extinguish in her came from him. Tomorrow, she told herself, would be harder. And that was fine, because every time someone tried to break her, she remembered that she was her father's daughter. And breaking wasn't in her blood. Why did they call it Hell Week? She found out before sunrise. A blast of air horns ripped through the barracks at 2:00 a.m. Boots hit the floor. Orders shouted. Chaos in the dark. Sarah was on her feet in seconds, gear on, rifle slung. The cold air outside bit through her uniform like a blade. Instructors paced in front of them, eyes like sharks circling blood. For the next 72 hours, Sergeant Rodriguez bellowed, you will be tested in ways you can't imagine. Sleep, food, comfort, forget all of it. Some of you will quit. Some of you will wish you had. Those who don't will find out who they really are. The wind from the ocean carried the smell of salt and diesel. Waves pounded the distant shore. Somewhere behind the sergeant, the horizon was just beginning to turn silver. Sarah's pulse slowed into a rhythm. She'd been here before, not this exact place, but this feeling. The calm that came before the storm when fear had already burned itself out and all that remained was focus. 5-mile run, full gear, move. 50-pound packs slammed against backs. The recruits took off down the sand. The first step sank deep, the second burned, the third felt like running through cement. Instructors rode alongside on ATVs, shouting insults, spitting encouragement that sounded like threats. Thompson positioned himself right behind Sarah. She could hear his breathing, heavy and deliberate. Every few strides, his boot clipped the heel of her own. Once, twice. Then again. Having trouble keeping up Martinez, he taunted, voice low, just for her. She didn't answer, just adjusted her pace, faster, smoother, pulling ahead until his footsteps faded behind her. By the 3rd mile, recruits were already collapsing, dragging packs, vomiting into the sand. The instructors shouted names, pulled quitters aside, marked them off the roster. Sarah kept running. Her lungs were knives, her legs fire, but her breathing was steady. Inhale, exhale, one foot then the other. Dad did worse than this, she told herself. He faced fire, not sand. By the 5th mile, dawn was breaking, a cold, pale light spilling across exhausted faces. Sarah crossed the finish line near the front of the group. Thompson stumbled in several minutes later, covered in sand and fury. Next came the obstacle course. They crawled under barbed wire, scaled wooden walls, dragged logs through mud. Sand coated her skin like armor. Thompson's voice echoed somewhere behind her. Look at her show off. Bet she can't last another day. She ignored it. She learned that hate was just another form of weakness. Hours passed. They ran drills until their hands bled. When the sun dropped, they moved into water training. The Pacific wasn't kind. At midnight, the water was black glass. The recruits lined up on the edge of the surf, teeth chattering. Link arms, the instructors shouted. Welcome to the world's coldest spa. They hit the water as one. Instant pain, a full-body shock. Salt filled her nose and mouth. The current tugged hard, threatening to pull them apart. They clung tighter. The cold drilled into her bones, then into her soul. Next to her, Kelly gasped, I can't. Yes, you can, Sarah said quietly, her voice barely audible over the waves. Just breathe. 30 minutes, recruits, the instructor shouted. 30 minutes felt like eternity. Somewhere in that frozen water, the human mind began to break down, time warped, thoughts fractured. Sarah focused on rhythm. Breathe. Count. Remember why you're here. When the whistle finally blew, they crawled out shivering, shaking so hard she could barely feel her legs. But she didn't fall. She stood, soaked, freezing, alive. "Nice work, Martinez," Rodriguez muttered, barely loud enough for her to hear. There was something like respect in his tone, not softness, just recognition. She didn't smile, just nodded and fell back into line. By the second day, exhaustion became something physical, a living thing wrapped around her shoulders. 4 hours of sleep in 48, muscles quivering with every step. Recruits began to hallucinate, whispering to people who weren't there, laughing at nothing. Sarah wasn't immune. Shadows shifted in the corners of her vision, turning into her father's silhouette, his voice a memory whispering, "You're stronger than they think, Mija. Don't stop now." She didn't stop. During waterborne drills that afternoon, they had to swim underwater 50 meters with diving weights. Thompson struggled, losing grip of one of his weights halfway through. It dropped, clanging against Sarah's path. She twisted hard, dodging it, losing air faster because of the detour. She surfaced gasping, but she made it. When she climbed out, Thompson was already speaking to the instructor. "Sorry, sir, lost my grip on the weight. Won't happen again." Sarah said nothing, but Sergeant Rodriguez's eyes flicked between them with quiet calculation. The pattern wasn't invisible anymore. Later, back at the barracks, Kelly limped toward her bunk, hands trembling. "I'm not sure I can do this," she whispered. "They're breaking us." Sarah didn't hesitate. "Then let them. That's how they see what's left." Kelly gave a weak smile. "You don't scare easy, do you?" "I've already seen what fear can do," Sarah said softly. "It took my father. I won't let it take me." When lights went out, she lay staring at the ceiling. Every muscle ached. Every thought was slow. She could feel tears pressing at the corners of her eyes, not weakness, just release, but she blinked them away. Sleep came in fragments, dreams of sand, of waves, of her father's voice calling through gunfire. Day 3. They woke to the sound of shouting and the smell of smoke. Another exercise, this one tactical, simulated ambush, team coordination under fire. Sarah was assigned to Thompson's squad again. "Martinez," he barked, "stay behind me. You mess this up, we all fail." He moved like a man trying to impress someone watching, which, of course, they were. SEAL instructors observed from towers, taking notes. Sarah followed orders but stayed alert. The scenario required navigating through mock enemy territory and rescuing a downed pilot. Halfway through, Thompson made a wrong turn, leading them straight into an ambush zone. Paintball rounds rained from hidden turrets. Chaos. Recruits dove for cover. Thompson froze, shouting conflicting commands. Sarah saw an opening. "Left flank 50 meters," she shouted, motioning for 2 recruits to move with her. They followed instinctively. Within seconds, she cleared a path out of the kill zone. The exercise ended shortly after their pilot recovered, their team intact. The evaluator's whistles cut the air. Thompson tried to regain control of the narrative. "Good job, team, we." But Rodriguez was already walking towards Sarah, expression unreadable. "You saw the trap before it sprung. Why?" She answered without hesitation. "Because, sir, the wind shifted. I smelled powder residue." Rodriguez looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Noted." As they assembled afterward, Thompson glared at her. "Don't think that makes you special." Sarah looked back calmly. "Then stop acting like it does." He had no response. That night they gathered again on the beach. Another drill, more cold, but the air felt different, heavier, charged. Exhaustion and pride mingled like oil and water. During the lineup, Thompson muttered under his breath, low, bitter. "This is what happens when they lower standards. Some people just don't belong here." Sarah turned her head slightly, meeting his eyes. Her voice was quiet, but it carried farther than she expected. "You're right, some people don't, but it's not who you think." The recruits nearby froze. Even the ocean seemed to pause. "Then, is there a problem here?" Sergeant Rodriguez's voice broke the silence. "No, Sergeant," Sarah said. Thompson straightened instantly. "No, Sergeant." Rodriguez's gaze lingered on both of them. "Good, because the only thing I care about is performance, and some of you might want to focus more on your own." The rest of the night blurred into punishment runs, surf torture, and navigation under zero light. Sarah's body felt like it was dissolving, every nerve firing on instinct alone. But beneath the fatigue was something unbreakable, a strange, steady calm. When she thought she might collapse, she imagined her father's last stand. 27 minutes under enemy fire, holding a position so others could live. She'd grown up hearing only fragments of the story, but she knew enough. That memory became her anchor. By the final dawn, the instructors gathered them around. Eyes sunken, lips cracked, uniforms filthy. They looked like ghosts. Only a handful remained. "This is your last test," Rodriguez announced. "Individual evaluation. You'll lead a team in a simulated mission. Navigation, tactics, endurance. We'll see what's left of you." Sarah was assigned to lead a squad, and predictably, Thompson was on it. He immediately stepped forward. "With respect, Sergeant, I think I'm better suited for leadership." Rodriguez didn't blink. "The instructors don't share your opinion. Martinez, you have command." Thompson's jaw tightened. Sarah looked at her team. "We do this by the book. Everyone pulls weight, no heroics." They moved into the field. The scenario was simple. Infiltrate, retrieve intel, exfiltrate undetected. It was chaos disguised as simplicity. Sarah mapped every move, adjusting for terrain and noise discipline. When one recruit got disoriented, she guided him back. When Thompson stumbled, literally and tactically, she covered for him, redirecting the squad without exposing his mistake. No blame, no hesitation. Hours later, they returned to base tired, scratched, but successful. Thompson walked beside her in silence for the first time in weeks. Finally, he said quietly, "That was good leadership back there, when I screwed up." She glanced at him. "We're a team. Teams cover for each other." He nodded once, nothing more needed. That night, as the stars stretched across the California sky, Sarah sat alone outside the barracks. The camp was silent except for the ocean. Her body ached beyond comprehension, but inside peace. She thought about her father again, about that tattoo, about what it meant to carry a legacy not on her skin but in her choices. Tomorrow new challenges would come. They always did. But tonight, for the first time since she'd arrived, Sarah Martinez let herself breathe, really breathe, and realize something profound. Respect wasn't something they could give her. It was something she had already earned. Why did the entire base fall silent when the black SUVs rolled in? The 5th week of training had barely begun, the recruits still carrying the exhaustion of Hell Week in their bones, when the convoy appeared. 2 matte black vehicles, windows tinted, moving with the quiet authority of men who didn't need to announce who they were. A whisper rippled through the formation. "SEALs." Even Sergeant Rodriguez straightened his posture as the first door opened. The man who stepped out carried his presence like a weapon, tall, broad-shouldered, gray at the temples, with eyes that could make a room stand at attention. The name on his uniform read Commander James Mitchell. Sarah's pulse quickened. She knew that name. Everyone did. But for her, it carried something more, a memory from 3 years earlier when she had been a low-ranking communications specialist sitting quietly in the back of a joint operations briefing. He hadn't noticed her then. He hadn't needed to. But she had never forgotten his voice, the calm authority, the quiet intensity. Men like that didn't just lead missions, they left marks on history. Now he was walking toward them. "Recruits," Sergeant Rodriguez barked. "Commander Mitchell will be overseeing your evaluations this week. Treat this as both an honor and an opportunity. Very few of you will ever train under a man of his experience." The commander's voice carried across the courtyard, firm but measured. "Good morning. I'm not here to inspire speeches or hand out compliments. I'm here to see who's got what it takes to operate under pressure, the kind that doesn't give you time to think. Some of you believe you're ready for special operations. Today, we'll find out. The sun hung low over the base. Sweat already gathered under their uniforms. Sarah stood in formation, her heartbeat steady but her mind racing. She didn't know it yet, but this day would change everything. The first evaluation was a live simulation, a full tactical assault on a mock enemy compound. Smoke grenades, paintball rounds, live radio chatter. The instructors had designed it to mimic real combat chaos. Bad intel, shifting orders, simulated injuries. Sarah was assigned to a squad led by Thompson. He was practically vibrating with excitement, desperate to impress the commander. During the briefing, his voice grew louder, more confident, overcompensating for the fear underneath. "Martinez," he said, pointing toward the layout on the board, "you take the left flank. It's the most exposed, but someone's gotta do it. Think you can handle that?" The tone was familiar, that half-smile that said he expected her to fail. Sarah studied the map quietly. The left flank wasn't just dangerous. It was also the only path that could get them close enough to complete the objective quickly, if executed right. She looked up, "Roger that." Thompson blinked, maybe surprised by how calmly she accepted. As the simulation began, the air filled with smoke and shouting. Paintball fire snapped through the air like real bullets. Sarah sprinted low, moving from cover to cover, the dirt biting into her knees. Her training took over, sight lines, angles, distances, all calculated in seconds. Halfway through, chaos erupted. A recruit named Davis, covering Sarah's approach, stepped on a concealed training mine. A blast, harmless but loud, signaled his death. His vest sensors flashed red. "Man down," someone yelled. Thompson's voice cracked through the radio. "Martinez, abort mission. Fall back to rally point." But from her position, Sarah saw something he didn't. The target building was exposed, one final push, and she could plant the simulated explosive. If she fell back now, they'd fail. "Negative," she said, voice calm. "I can still complete the objective." "That's an order, Martinez." She hesitated, then made her choice. Ignoring him, she broke cover and ran. Paint rounds cracked around her, slamming into walls, kicking up dirt. She slid behind a low barricade, popped out, returned fire, moved again. Her body moved with surgical precision, no panic, just rhythm. The final stretch was open ground. She went for it. 3 seconds, 2, 1. She reached the wall, slapped the training charge in place, and rolled into cover as the timer beeped green. Objective complete. When the horn sounded, "Exercise over," she exhaled for the first time in minutes. Her arm ached from the recoil. She checked her gear, her weapon, her sleeve. It was torn badly. The fabric hung loose, ripped open by a paint round. And there it was. The tattoo. The Marine Corps eagle, globe, and anchor, entwined with a Navy insignia, names, coordinates, and one line that stopped the world cold. Gunnery Sergeant Roberto Martinez, KIA, Afghanistan, 2011. For a moment, everything went silent. Thompson, approaching to chew her out, froze mid-step. His mouth opened, closed. "What the hell is that?" The other recruits turned, curiosity cutting through exhaustion. Kelly's eyes widened. "Sarah, is that your father?" Sarah's pulse hammered. She hadn't meant for anyone to see it. Not here, not now. "Yes," she said quietly. Before anyone could speak, a new voice sliced through the tension. "Martinez, front and center." "Commander Mitchell." Every recruit went still. Sarah's hands trembled for the first time since training began. She snapped to attention. "Yes, sir." Thompson jumped in, eager to regain control. "Sir, Martinez disobeyed a direct order during the simulation." "I wasn't speaking to you, recruit," Commander Mitchell said without looking his way. His eyes were locked on Sarah. I said Martinez, front and center. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Sarah walked forward, every step measured, aware of dozens of eyes drilling into her. Her arm was still bare, the tattoo visible under the sun. She felt exposed in a way she never had before, not physically, but personally, like the deepest part of her story had been dragged into the open. Commander Mitchell stopped a few feet away, studying her. He didn't speak for a long moment. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Sarah could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the heat of the sun on her neck. The commander's gaze flicked from her face to her tattoo, then back again. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried through the entire field. "Rodriguez, I'll need to speak with this recruit privately." "Yes, sir," Rodriguez said. Sarah caught a glimpse of Thompson's face as she followed the commander away. The arrogance was gone, replaced by something new, uncertainty. The murmurs of the recruits faded behind her. She didn't know where they were going, only that the commander's pace was deliberate, not angry, not hurried, just thoughtful. He led her to a quiet stretch behind the training facility, where the sound of the ocean filled the silence. Then he stopped and turned to face her. "At ease, Martinez." She relaxed slightly, but her nerves didn't. "Sir, I—" "Don't speak yet," he said gently. "That tattoo tells a story I already know." Her breath caught. "Roberto Martinez was your father." "Yes, sir," she said softly. "Gunnery Sergeant, Marine Corps Force Recon." Mitchell nodded slowly, his jaw tightening. "I knew him." Sarah blinked. You served with him." He exhaled, his gaze turning distant, as if watching ghosts move through the trees. 3 deployments in Afghanistan between 2009 and 2011. Your father saved my life twice, saved a dozen others more times than I can count. The words hit like a wave. No one had ever said it so plainly. He continued, voice quieter now. He was one of the finest Marines I ever knew, calm under fire, wicked sense of humor, the kind of man who'd carry everyone else before thinking about himself. Sarah swallowed hard, fighting the sting in her eyes. "The day he died," Mitchell's voice trailed for a moment before returning softer. "We were on a joint op. Intel was wrong, it was an ambush. We were pinned in a valley, no cover, wounded everywhere. He volunteered to stay behind to cover our retreat. We argued. He knew what it meant. He stayed anyway." Sarah's throat closed. She'd heard fragments of this story growing up, bits and pieces from official reports and folded letters, but never from someone who'd been there. "He held that position for 27 minutes, Mitchell said, long enough for us to extract everyone. By the time we got back, he was gone. 12 people went home because of him. 12 families that didn't have to mourn." Sarah couldn't stop the tear that finally slipped down her cheek. Mitchell looked at her with something deep in his expression, not pity but respect, the kind that came from shared history. "After his funeral, I made myself a promise. If I ever met a member of his family, I'd do everything I could to help them achieve what he never got to finish." She looked down, words barely leaving her lips. "Sir, I wasn't trying to use his name. I didn't want." "I know," his voice softened. "That's why this moment matters. You didn't come here expecting special treatment. You earned your place. You endured more than most recruits I've seen, harassment, sabotage, isolation, and you never once played the victim. You let your work speak for you." He took a slow breath, then looked her dead in the eye. "What I saw out there today, that decision to ignore an order when you knew it was the right call, that was pure Roberto Martinez. Tactical intuition, controlled defiance, moral clarity under fire. You didn't act out of pride. You acted out of purpose." Sarah's heart pounded. He was still speaking, but she already knew this was the turning point. The moment her father's ghost stopped haunting her and started walking beside her. "Martinez," Mitchell said quietly, "I'm recommending you for immediate advancement to Phase 2. Advanced tactical and leadership training, under my direct supervision. Her breath caught. Sir, it's earned, he said simply. Not gifted. You've shown the kind of resilience and integrity we build our teams on. What you've done here will echo further than you realize. He glanced back toward the training field. As for the others, don't concern yourself. Their behavior told me everything I needed to know about their character. Sarah felt something inside her loosen, not victory, not relief, but peace. The kind that came after a long fight you didn't know you were winning. Mitchell gave a faint smile, the first she'd ever seen from him. Your father talked about you often, you know, said you were going to change the world someday. Sarah blinked hard. He did. He did. Mitchell turned to leave, then paused. Turns out he was right. As she stood there, the wind catching her torn sleeve, Sarah realized that the tattoo she'd hidden for so long wasn't a secret anymore. It was a banner. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid to let it be seen. Why did everyone stop talking when she walked back into the courtyard? The entire training ground had fallen still, the air heavy with something unspoken. Recruits stood in formation, eyes darting toward the barracks, where Sarah Martinez and Commander Mitchell had disappeared nearly 20 minutes earlier. Whispers flickered through the ranks like sparks on dry grass. What do you think's happening? Is she getting discharged? Maybe she's in trouble for breaking orders. Or maybe, one voice trailed off uneasy, maybe not. Thompson stood at the front, jaw tight, trying to look unaffected, but the color in his face betrayed him. He'd spent the last few weeks mocking her. Now she was alone with the most respected commander in the special operations community, and that silence, that delay, terrified him. When they finally appeared again, the courtyard straightened as if electrified. Commander Mitchell walked with steady authority, hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. Sarah followed beside him, calm, composed, her torn sleeve now neatly rolled up. The tattoo was still visible under the morning sun, its black ink stark against her skin. Every recruit's eyes went to it. The courtyard felt smaller, quieter. Attention, Sergeant Rodriguez barked. Dozens of boots slammed the ground in unison. Mitchell stopped in front of the formation. His voice carried the weight of oceans and wars, quiet but commanding, at ease. He let the silence hang for a moment, scanning every face. The same way a surgeon studies an X-ray, looking not for what's visible, but for what's wrong underneath. What you're about to witness, he began, isn't about rank or gender or scorecards. It's about character, the thing that separates a recruit from a warrior. Sarah stood beside him, posture perfect, eyes straight ahead. The breeze lifted strands of her hair. The courtyard seemed to hold its breath. Recruit Martinez, he said, his tone now formal, has been selected for immediate advancement to Phase 2 Special Operations training under my direct supervision. The reaction was instantaneous. Gasps, murmurs, shock. Kelly Johnson smiled, tears threatening to spill as pride replaced surprise. But most of the others, including Thompson, looked as if someone had dropped a grenade in their formation. Thompson stepped forward, his voice shaking between disbelief and defiance. Sir, with all due respect, I don't understand. Martinez disobeyed a direct order during the assault scenario. She went off mission. Mitchell didn't even blink. Are you questioning my judgment, recruit? Thompson faltered. No, sir. I just think maybe there's information you're not aware of. Really? The commander's tone remained calm, but every syllable hit like a hammer. Then by all means enlighten me. What have I missed? Thompson hesitated. His confidence drained as he realized every eye, including the instructors, was on him. Williams, Phillips, and Davis, the men who had followed his lead for weeks, suddenly found their boots fascinating. Well, sir, Thompson began, swallowing hard. Martinez has had difficulty following orders. She's been challenging to work with, and there have been issues with team cohesion. Team cohesion, Mitchell repeated softly, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. I see. He took a slow step forward, eyes locked on Thompson. The courtyard was so silent that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Tell me, Recruit Thompson, Mitchell said quietly, what do you know about Gunnery Sergeant Roberto Martinez? The question landed like a shot. Thompson blinked. Sir, I'm not familiar with that name. No, Mitchell said, I didn't think you would be. He turned to gesture toward Sarah's exposed tattoo. Gunnery Sergeant Roberto Martinez was this recruit's father. He was killed in action in Afghanistan in 2011, while saving 12 lives, including my own. Every recruit froze. Mitchell let the silence stretch, the weight of the revelation settling deep. For the past 5 weeks, he continued, I've been observing this program, watching every drill, every exercise, every interaction. I've seen recruits push themselves past exhaustion. I've also seen others sabotage, insult, and harass one of their own. His voice hardened, quiet fury beneath the control. You believed no one was watching. You were wrong. The air went still. He began packing slowly, his boots deliberate on the concrete. We test more than endurance here. We test integrity. When someone's gear goes missing, when their water bottle disappears, when their compass fails, we watch how they react. When others see injustice and do nothing, we watch that too. He stopped. What I've seen in Martinez is grit, composure, and professionalism under sustained attack. What I've seen in some of you, his eyes flicked toward Thompson, Williams, Phillips, and Davis, is cowardice dressed as confidence. No one moved. Kelly's breathing was audible. A few recruits exchanged looks, guilt, shame, recognition. Sergeant Rodriguez, Mitchell said. Sir, call forward the following recruits: Thompson, Williams, Phillips, Davis. They stepped out of line one by one, faces pale, shoulders stiff. The reality was sinking in. This wasn't a lecture. This was judgment. Mitchell stopped in front of them. You 4 have failed this program. Thompson's voice cracked. Sir, we didn't, we were just. You thought wrong, Mitchell interrupted. His tone didn't rise, but it grew sharper, cutting through excuses like wire. You believed that breaking someone else down made you stronger. You believed that mocking a fellow recruit proved superiority. You were wrong. The only thing you've proven is that your character cannot withstand pressure. Thompson looked at the ground. Williams blinked hard, jaw clenched to keep from shaking. The truth, Mitchell said, stepping closer, is that this program doesn't eliminate the weak, it eliminates the dishonest. It exposes who you are when nobody's cheering, and you have all been weighed and found wanting. He turned back to the group. As of this moment, these 4 are dismissed from naval special warfare preparation. Their actions and attitudes disqualify them from any future consideration in this program. Gasps rippled through the formation. Thompson's face drained of color. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. Rodriguez stepped forward, clipboard in hand. Understood, sir. Orders will be processed immediately. Mitchell nodded once, then he turned toward Sarah. Martinez, he said quietly, you've endured more than most. Is there anything you'd like to say to your fellow recruits before you leave for advanced training? The silence stretched, every head turned toward her. Sarah took a slow breath. Her throat was tight, but her voice came steady, clear. I want to thank those who treated me with respect, she said, eyes scanning the crowd until they found Kelly's. You reminded me that not everyone loses themselves under pressure. Then she looked toward the 4 dismissed men. Her tone didn't harden, it softened. And to the rest, I hope you learned something from this. The military isn't about proving who's tougher. It's about learning who you are when everything's stripped away. The uniform doesn't make you stronger. Your character does. Mitchell's expression softened, the faintest trace of pride. Outstanding. As Sarah stepped back into formation, Thompson suddenly took a step forward. His voice was quieter now, raw. "Martinez." She turned. "I owe you an apology," he said, words catching in his throat. "What I did was wrong. You didn't deserve any of it. You're a better soldier than I am." The courtyard went silent again. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "Apology accepted. Just make sure the next person you meet doesn't need one." Thompson swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." The title wasn't protocol. It was respect, the kind that couldn't be ordered, only earned. Rodriguez called out for the dismissed recruits to collect their gear. As they walked off, the silence in the courtyard wasn't triumphant. It was heavy, reflective. Even the ones who hadn't been involved seemed to stand a little straighter, as if reminded that the rules here went deeper than drills and discipline. Mitchell faced the remaining recruits. "Let this serve as a lesson. You are not judged only by how well you perform, but by how you treat those beside you. Strength without honor is useless. Skill without empathy is dangerous. The battlefield will demand both." He paused, letting his words linger. "Dismissed." The formation broke slowly, still absorbing what had just happened. Kelly hurried over to Sarah, throwing her arms around her. "You did it," she said, voice trembling. "You really did it." Sarah hugged her back, then smiled faintly. "No, we did. You stood up when it mattered." Kelly's eyes glistened. "I'm gonna miss you, you know." "I'll miss you too, but you'll finish this, and you'll be great at it." Kelly nodded, trying not to cry. "Promise me something." "What?" "When you get wherever you're going next, don't forget us. The ones still trying to get there." Sarah smiled, tired but genuine. "Never." As she walked toward the administrative building to finalize her transfer orders, the weight of everything hit her all at once. The long nights, the humiliation, the silent endurance. All of it had built to this moment, but she didn't feel victorious. She just felt at peace. Inside, she paused by the window. Outside, the recruits were dispersing, smaller now, quieter. She saw Thompson stop at the edge of the courtyard, looking back toward the flagpole, then at her. He nodded once, a silent acknowledgement before disappearing into the barracks. Sarah took a deep breath and looked down at her arm. The tattoo caught the light. Her father's name. The anchor, the globe, the dates. A story written in ink and pain and purpose. Commander Mitchell's voice echoed in her head. "He saved 12 lives. You're living proof of the 13th. She smiled softly. For the first time, she wasn't running from his memory. She was carrying it forward. As she stepped out into the sun, orders in hand, the base loudspeakers crackled to life, calling her name. "Recruit Martinez, report to Commander Mitchell's office." Her next chapter was already waiting. Why did the sea always calm her, even when everything else felt like war? 6 months had passed since training, half a year since the courtyard silence, the dismissal, the truth. Now the endless blue stretched in every direction, sunlight glinting off the waves like shattered glass. The Navy destroyer USS Hamilton cut through the water with effortless authority, its engines thrumming deep beneath her boots. Sarah Martinez stood on the deck, wind whipping her hair into her face, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands. She traded the recruit's fatigues for a clean uniform stitched with a single new patch. Naval Special Operations Candidate, Phase II. Her reflection in the steel hull looked older, sharper. Not because of the months of training, but because of everything those months had taken. She learned to clear rooms, run tactical comms, and shoot from moving platforms. She learned to read maps by sound, to plan operations without sleep, to navigate moral choices that didn't have right answers. But the hardest thing she'd learned was silence. How to stand still long enough to hear herself think again. Enjoying the view, a voice asked behind her. Sarah turned. Commander Mitchell leaned against the rail, a cup of coffee of his own. The sea wind tugged at his gray hair. His eyes, as always, missed nothing. "It's peaceful," Sarah said. For now, he replied, then softer, you've come a long way. She smiled faintly, not far enough yet. That's the right answer, he said with approval. The moment you think you've arrived, you start to drift. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, both watching the horizon. Then he spoke again. You've got orders. Her heart skipped. Deployment. Not yet. Evaluation first. Then assignment. Lieutenant Commander Chen requested you personally. Chen, she blinked. The one who runs the forward operations unit. Mitchell nodded. He's forming a small team for an overseas security mission. Humanitarian cover, but you and I both know those words mean the situation's unstable. He wants operators who can think, not just shoot. Sarah absorbed it in silence. Part of her had been waiting for this moment, the call to step into something real. The other part still felt that flicker of uncertainty that never truly left. Am I ready? Mitchell seemed to read it in her expression. Nerves are normal. Overconfidence is dangerous. You're right where you should be. Sir, she asked quietly, why me? He looked out at the horizon, voice thoughtful. Because you don't fight for approval. You fight for purpose. I've seen soldiers with more muscle, more medals, more noise, but very few with your restraint. He turned to her. You remind me of your father in one way, not in how loud you were, but in how quiet you stayed when it mattered. Sarah swallowed the sudden emotion rising in her chest. He used to tell me that silence doesn't mean weakness. It means you're listening. Mitchell smiled faintly. He told me the same thing. The ship's intercom crackled. Commander Mitchell, report to command briefing room. He nodded toward the hatch. You're with me. Time to see what Chen's got planned. They walked below deck, metal corridors humming with machinery and the faint smell of oil and salt. Every step echoed, steady and precise. When they entered the briefing room, Lieutenant Commander Chen was already there, mid-40s, sharp eyes, the posture of a man who never wasted words. Mitchell, he greeted with a curt nod, and this must be Martinez. Sarah saluted, sir. Chen studied her for a moment. You were the one from the Martinez evaluation incident. Yes, sir. Good, that means you understand pressure. He gestured toward the map projected on the wall, a stretch of coastline marked with red zones and coordinates. Region, West Africa. Country name classified. Civilian aid teams have been caught in escalating crossfire between rebel factions. We're deploying under humanitarian logistics, extraction and protection. Your role will be overwatch and tactical communications. Sniper overwatch? Sarah asked quietly. Chen raised an eyebrow as if testing her. That a problem? No, sir, she said. It's where I'm most focused. He gave a small approving nod. Good answer. Mitchell crossed his arms. Who's on her team? Chen tapped the digital display. Photos appeared, 4 faces. Lieutenant Alex Grier, team lead. Petty Officer Miller, medic. Ensign Park, tech specialist. And Martinez, overwatch. Departure in 72 hours. Mitchell's gaze flicked to Sarah. You'll do fine. Chen looked between them. I've read your file, Martinez. You've had to fight uphill your entire career. You remind me of someone I used to know. Who? She asked. Myself, Chen said simply, then turned back to the map. The rest of the briefing blurred, coordinates, timing, radio frequencies. But the only words that stuck in Sarah's head were the ones Mitchell said before they left the room. Whatever happens out there, he told her quietly, remember your value isn't in how loud you fire. It's in how calm you stay when everyone else loses their head. 2 days later, the USS Hamilton dropped anchor off the African coast. The humidity hit like a wave as they stepped off the transport boat, thick air filled with the smell of fuel, salt, and distant rain. The outpost was a temporary humanitarian base. Sandbags, supply tents, and a flag barely clinging to its pole in the wind. The civilian aid workers looked tired, eyes hollow, movements quick. They weren't trained for combat zones, and it showed. Sarah adjusted her rifle strap and followed Grier to the command tent. The team spread out, Miller checking med kits, Park setting up signal relays. She scanned the perimeter, instincts already ticking through every noise, every shadow. Something felt off. Too quiet. She didn't say it out loud, not yet, but the hairs on the back of her neck lifted. Grier noticed her stillness. Something wrong, Martinez. Not sure yet, she said, but the locals, they're moving supplies too fast, like they know something coming. Grier frowned. You're reading too much into it. Maybe, she replied, I still scanning the horizon, or maybe not. By nightfall, they'd set up overwatch positions along the ridge overlooking the camp. Sarah's rifle rested against her shoulder, scope glinting faintly in the moonlight. The air smelled of iron and dust. Through her headset, Grier's voice crackled. How's your visibility, Martinez? Clear, sir, but the tree line's too dark. No thermal movement yet. Copy that, stay alert. She shifted her scope, sweeping slowly across the forest edge. The wind rustled through the tall grass. For a moment she thought she saw something, a flicker of reflection, metal catching the moonlight. Movement at bearing 240, she whispered. Possible scope glint, could be recon. Confirm before engaging. She steadied her breathing, focused, waited. Then the faintest sound, not wind, not animal. A metallic click. Her finger tightened around the trigger. Contact, she said, voice calm. They're watching us. A moment later, the first shot rang out, not hers. A bullet slammed into the sandbag beside Grier's tent. Shouts erupted. Chaos. Aid workers dove for cover as the ridge lit up with muzzle flashes from the tree line. Return fire. Martinez, overwatch now. She didn't need to be told twice. Her first shot cut through the dark, precise, controlled, devastating. Through her scope she saw the hostile drop, rifle clattering into the dirt. Another figure moved behind a tree, 2 quick breaths, 1 exhale, trigger squeeze, gone. Her world narrowed to rhythm and sound, every motion mechanical, rehearsed, serene. In the chaos below, Miller dragged a wounded aid worker to safety. Park shouted for a medic. Grier barked orders into the radio. But Sarah, she was the calm in the storm. Her mind steady, her heart cold and clear. After 12 minutes, the firefight ended as quickly as it began. The forest went still again. Smoke drifted over the ridge. Status, Grier called over comms. 3 hostiles neutralized, Sarah replied. No further movement. Good work, he said, voice tight but grateful. You saved our asses. She lowered her rifle slowly, muscles trembling. Her breathing came back heavy, not from fear, but from restraint. She wasn't proud, she wasn't relieved, she was just quiet. Later, when the camp finally settled, she sat alone by the shoreline. The waves whispered against the rocks, distant thunder rolling inland. Her hands still shook faintly, but not from adrenaline, from what always came after. The silence. The kind that forced you to feel everything you just ignored to survive. Mitchell's voice echoed in her head again. You remind me of your father, quiet when it matters. She looked at the stars, faint, scattered, barely visible through the haze. In them she imagined his voice, the same warmth she'd grown up with. You did good, Mija. You stayed calm. She smiled through the ache in her chest. Maybe he was watching, maybe not. But she was still walking the path he'd started, not for recognition, not for revenge, but for something simpler. Purpose. The sea stretched endlessly ahead, dark and unknowable, just like the road that awaited her. And as dawn began to rise over the water, the light catching her father's tattoo once more, Sarah Martinez whispered into the wind. I'm not done yet. Why did the air feel heavier that morning? The sun rose behind a wall of clouds, painting the jungle in shades of rust and gold. The smell of damp earth and smoke hung in the air. Sarah Martinez crouched behind a ridge, her rifle steady, her heartbeat slow, but something about the silence felt wrong. Too calculated, too expectant. It had been 3 weeks since the attack on the humanitarian base, 3 weeks of escorting convoys through unstable territory, watching peace agreements crumble faster than they could be signed. She begun to sense a pattern in the chaos, one that didn't feel accidental. Lieutenant Grier's voice whispered through comms. "Martinez, report." "Overwatch position secure," she replied. "No movement on thermal, but something's off. Locals have been avoiding this route all morning." Grier hesitated. "Could be coincidence." "Or warning," she murmured. The line crackled. "Orders stand. We move at 900. She didn't argue, but she felt the unease coil tighter inside her. You learn to trust instinct in this world. It didn't come from paranoia, it came from survival. The convoy below consisted of 2 armored trucks and a supply vehicle, each packed with food and medical aid for displaced families deeper inland. They were supposed to meet local volunteers halfway, simple logistics, no enemy activity reported. But Sarah had stopped believing in no enemy activity a long time ago. Through her scope, she scanned the tree line one more time. Birds, leaves, a glint of. Her pulse jumped. "Contact," she said quietly. 2 o'clock, 30 meters off the north route, metallic reflection, possibly a sight. "Confirm," Grier ordered. She adjusted focus. Nothing. The glint was gone, only stillness. "Lost visual." Grier exhaled through the radio. "We can't delay, move out." The convoy rumbled forward. Tires crunched through mud. The supply truck bounced on uneven terrain. Sarah tracked every movement, muscles tight, eyes darting between tree line and trail. Then the first explosion hit. A blinding flash tore through the earth. The lead truck flipped onto its side, debris erupting into the air. The shockwave slammed through her position, knocking dirt into her eyes. "Ambush, move, move," Grier's voice roared over comms. Sarah rolled behind cover, scanning for targets. Shadows poured from the tree line, a dozen, maybe more, armed, fast, shouting in a language she didn't recognize. She exhaled, centered her aim, and fired. The first target dropped, then another. Below, Miller dragged an injured driver from the wrecked truck while Park worked to reestablish comms. Grier's team took cover behind the remaining vehicle, returning fire, but they were pinned. "Martinez suppressing fire East Ridge," Grier shouted. "Copy." Her rifle thundered, precision shots into movement and muzzle flashes, but for every hostile she neutralized, 2 more appeared. "Command, this is Alpha Team," Grier yelled into the radio. "We are under heavy contact, coordinates static. Comms are jammed." Park swore. "Signal interference, they're jamming us locally." Sarah gritted her teeth, scanning higher ground. "Grier, they've got the ridge. We need to flank before they close in." "Negative," Grier barked. "We hold the position." "Sir." "That's an order." She hesitated just a second, but that second could mean everything. From her vantage point, she could see what he couldn't. The enemy was moving in a half-circle, trying to box them in. Holding meant dying. "Copy that," she said, but she was already moving. Sliding down the slope, she sprinted through brush and dirt, rifle tight to her shoulder. The sounds of gunfire grew louder, sharper, chaos compressed into seconds. She reached the far side of the ridge, ducked behind a boulder, and took aim again. 1 shot, 2, 3. The advancing flank fell. The rest faltered, shouting in confusion. "Grier, push west now," she ordered. "You've got 10 seconds of cover." This time he didn't argue. "Copy, moving." The team surged toward the western line. Miller hauled the wounded. Park fired bursts from the truck window. Smoke thickened, stinging eyes and lungs. Sarah kept firing until the last of them broke and scattered back into the trees. Then silence. only the ringing in her ears and the distant rumble of retreating engines. Martinez, Grier gasped through comms. Status. She exhaled slowly. Overwatch secure, hostiles retreating east. They survived, barely. But her relief faded when she noticed movement by the wreckage. One of the fallen hostiles crawling, trying to reach a rifle. Sarah raised her scope. Her finger brushed the trigger. Then she froze. He wasn't older than 16. The rifle beside him was almost as long as his arm. He looked terrified, eyes wide, lips trembling, whispering something she couldn't hear. Martinez, clear the area, Grier ordered. Finish any remaining threats. She didn't answer. Through her scope, she watched the boy clutch his stomach, bleeding badly. Not a combatant. Not really. A child with a gun in a war that didn't care how old you were. Her pulse thundered. Martinez, respond. She lowered her rifle. Negative, sir, no threat remaining. Grier paused. Repeat your last. She didn't. Just took off her headset for a moment and sat back against the rock, breathing hard. The jungle went quiet again. Hours later, the convoy limped back to base. 2 wounded, none dead, a miracle. But Sarah's silence didn't go unnoticed. In the debrief tent, Grier slammed his fist onto the table. You disobeyed orders, again. Sarah met his glare. I followed the mission's intent, protect the team, complete extraction. We're alive. You went rogue. I adapted. Damn it, Martinez, he snapped. You could have compromised the entire op. What if that flanking maneuver failed? It didn't. He stared at her, jaw clenched. You're lucky the results back you up, but that insubordination won't play well in a report. I didn't come here for reports, she said quietly. I came here to do the right thing. The words hung heavy between them. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Lieutenant Commander Chen stepped into the tent. That's enough, Chen said. Both snapped to attention. I've read your preliminary logs, Chen continued. Grier, your leadership under fire was solid. Martinez, he turned to her, eyes unreadable, your instincts saved this team. Again. Thank you, sir, she said. But, he added, your continued defiance of protocol is noted. Yes, sir. Chen studied her for a long moment, then softened slightly. Walk with me. Outside, the sun was sinking, turning the jungle gold and blood-red. The air buzzed with insects and distant thunder. Chen walked in silence for a while before speaking. You didn't take the shot. Sarah's throat tightened. No, sir. Why? She looked at the horizon. Because it wasn't an enemy, sir. It was a child, maybe forced, maybe scared, but not a target. Chen nodded slowly. And if he'd pulled the trigger first, then I'd have done what I had to do, but he didn't. He exhaled. You made a moral call. I made a human one. Chen stopped walking. You understand that sometimes those two things don't align in this job. I know, she said softly, but I also know that if I stop seeing the difference, I shouldn't be here. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he nodded almost imperceptibly. Mitchell said you had judgment. Now I see what he meant. He looked out over the jungle, voice distant. War is full of people who obey perfectly and think never. The best soldiers learn when not to obey. It's rare, dangerous, but necessary. He turned to face her. You'll make enemies because of that, the kind that wear uniforms. Sarah met his eyes. Then I'll face them like any other threat, carefully. Chen's mouth twitched, the closest thing he ever came to a smile. You've got nerve, Martinez. I'll give you that. They stood there for a while, watching the sun dip below the ridge. Finally, Chen spoke again, quieter this time. For what it's worth, you made the right call. Her shoulders eased slightly. Thank you, sir. He nodded once and started back toward the tents. But before he disappeared inside, he said over his shoulder, You remind me of Mitchell at your age. Don't tell him I said that. Sarah laughed under her breath, the sound soft, almost surprised. Yes, sir. That night the rain came hard. She sat alone outside her tent, rifle across her lap, staring at the jungle's dark outline. Lightning flashed far away. Each strike illuminated the world for just a second, and in those seconds she saw it all. The smoke, the fear, the faces, the boy's eyes. She closed her own and whispered something into the rain. Dad, how did you do this? How did you know what was right when everything looked wrong? The thunder didn't answer, but somehow in the steady rhythm of the rain, she felt him near, not as a ghost, but as a calm inside her chest. Maybe this was what legacy really was. Not medals, not stories, not tattoos, but conscience. The ability to stand in the middle of chaos and still hear what's right. By dawn, she was still awake, watching the light break through the mist. The next orders would come soon. They always did. But whatever they were, she knew the hardest battles were no longer outside. They were inside. Why did silence feel louder than gunfire? 3 weeks had passed since the ambush, and Sarah still couldn't sleep through the night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the boy's face, the look in his eyes before she lowered her rifle. He had lived, she knew that. But part of her still heard the shot she didn't take. Now she stood under fluorescent lights in a sterile conference room at the U.S. Naval Forward Operations Command. The sound of the air conditioning filled the gaps between voices. The tribunal had convened. 3 officers sat behind a long table, a panel of judgment in immaculate uniforms. Their expressions were neutral, their tone procedural. But Sarah could feel the unspoken tension in the room, the way their pens hovered just above paper, ready to write her story in black and white, stripped of all the gray that had made it real. Lieutenant Commander Chen stood to her left, hands clasped behind his back. He wasn't on trial, but he looked like he wanted to be. Across the room, Lieutenant Grier sat stiffly in his chair, expression unreadable. He hadn't spoken to her since the report had been filed. The senior officer in the middle cleared his throat. Recruit Martinez, you are here to address the events of Operation Meridian, specifically, your deviation from direct orders during engagement on February 4th. Sarah stood straight, eyes forward. Yes, sir. According to your commanding officer's report, you abandoned your assigned overwatch position, repositioned without authorization, and refused an order to eliminate a potential hostile combatant. Is that accurate? Yes, sir. Do you acknowledge these actions as a violation of operational protocol? Yes, sir, she said calmly. Then after a pause, but I don't acknowledge them as wrong. The second officer, a thin man with gray eyes, looked up from his notes. Explain. Sarah took a breath. We were ambushed. The enemy had the high ground. Holding position would have meant losing the entire convoy. I repositioned to neutralize the flank before they closed the perimeter. The first officer leaned forward. And the combatant you refused to eliminate. Her voice softened. A child, sir, approximately 16 years old, wounded, unarmed by the time of visual confirmation. A murmur rippled through the room. The gray-eyed officer frowned. You made that assessment under fire. Yes, sir. The senior officer tapped his pen against the table. Recruit Martinez, the rules of engagement are clear. When a potential threat remains on the field, your responsibility is to ensure team safety. With respect, sir, Sarah said, steady but firm, that rule exists to prevent hesitation that costs lives. It doesn't exist to justify killing without cause. Chen's jaw tightened slightly. She was treading on dangerous ground, but he didn't stop her. The senior officer's tone sharpened. So you believe you can rewrite engagement doctrine mid-firefight? No, sir. I believe that doctrine means nothing if it replaces judgment. Silence. One of the officers exchanged a glance with another. The senior one sighed. You're aware your actions have caused concern up the chain of command. I'm aware, she said quietly, but I'd rather answer for mercy than live with regret. For a long time, no one spoke. Then the door at the back of the room opened. Everyone turned. Commander James Mitchell stepped inside, uniform crisp, presence unmistakable. The senior officer rose slightly. "Commander, we weren't expecting." "You should have," Mitchell said, voice calm but cutting. "I trained her." He walked forward, stopping beside Chen and Sarah. The tension shifted instantly, like the air itself recognized authority when it entered. "I read the reports," he continued, "and they're missing something critical: context." The panel exchanged uneasy looks. "Commander, this is an internal inquiry. Your input is exactly what you need," Mitchell interrupted. "You want to talk about protocol? Fine. Let's talk about what it means in practice." He turned slightly, addressing the room, not the table. "Rules of engagement exist to guide decision-making when chaos takes over. But every rule assumes clarity, that you can tell friend from foe, threat from innocence. Anyone who's been in the field knows that's a lie. The battlefield doesn't give you clean choices. It gives you noise, smoke, and seconds to decide who lives." He looked back at Sarah. "She made the right call." The senior officer folded his hands. "You believe that disobeying a superior officer is the right call." "I believe that saving your own team by disobeying a flawed order is what keeps people alive," Mitchell said evenly. "If she'd followed the command to hold position, you'd be reviewing casualty reports instead of debriefs." The gray-eyed officer leaned forward, and the child combatant. Mitchell's jaw flexed. "If every frightened boy holding a weapon is our enemy, we'll have no world left worth defending." The room went still. Chen's gaze flicked toward Sarah, almost imperceptibly, a faint acknowledgement that Mitchell had said the words he couldn't. Mitchell continued, his voice softer now. "This young woman has demonstrated the two things we can't teach: restraint and conscience. I've seen men with more experience lose both after their first firefight. She's kept hers intact through sabotage, humiliation, and war." He faced the senior officer directly. "You're not just deciding whether she followed orders. You're deciding what kind of soldier this program produces: obedient or honorable." The words landed like a verdict before the verdict. The tribunal fell silent again. The officers leaned toward each other, whispering, pens scratching paper. After a moment, the senior one looked up. "Commander Mitchell, Lieutenant Commander Chen, please step outside while we deliberate." Mitchell nodded once. "Of course." Sarah hesitated. "Sir." He met her eyes. "Breathe. You've already done your part." As they stepped out into the hallway, the air outside the room felt heavier. Sarah leaned against the wall, her composure cracking for the first time all day. Her hands trembled slightly. Mitchell stood beside her, arms crossed, silent. After a long moment, she asked quietly, "Was I out of line in there?" He looked at her. "Out of line? No, outnumbered maybe, but never out of line." She let out a shaky breath. "I didn't expect you to come." He gave a faint smile. "I promised your father I'd look out for his own. Some debts don't expire." They stood there in silence, listening to the faint hum of fluorescent lights, until the door opened again. "Commander, Recruit Martinez, you may return." Inside, the panel's faces were unchanged, neutral masks of authority. The senior officer folded his hands. "After review of testimony and evidence, this tribunal finds that Recruit Sarah Martinez did indeed deviate from standard operational protocol. However," he paused, "given corroborating witness reports and commander evaluations, her actions directly prevented greater loss of life. Therefore, this board concludes that her deviation was justified under Rule 9 of field autonomy." Sarah blinked. She knew what that meant: operational discretion in the absence of clear command integrity. In recognition of initiative, tactical judgment, and conduct under fire. The officer continued. Recruit Martinez is hereby cleared of disciplinary action and is to be advanced for leadership evaluation under Commander Mitchell's supervision. The words washed over her slowly, relief, disbelief, exhaustion all at once. The officer closed the folder, dismissed. Outside, Mitchell clapped her shoulder once firm, proud. I told you, you're not the kind they break. She exhaled, tears threatening to surface but refusing to fall. Thank you, sir, for standing up for me. You stood up for yourself, he said. I just made sure they heard it. Chen approached a moment later, hands in his pockets. Congratulations, Martinez. That could have gone worse. Could have, she said, half laughing, half exhaling. Chen smiled faintly. You'll learn something important as you rise through the ranks. Survival isn't about shooting straighter. It's about knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. He started down the hall, then looked back. You did both today. That's rare. When he was gone, Sarah turned back to Mitchell. Sir, what happens now? He looked at her for a long moment. Now you lead. She frowned. Lead what? He smiled. You'll see. 2 weeks later. Sarah stood on the tarmac of Naval Air Station North Island, wind whipping her hair, duffel slung over her shoulder. In front of her, a small transport jet bearing the emblem of the Navy's Tactical Reconnaissance Division. This wasn't just another mission. It was a new world entirely. Mitchell approached from behind, holding a folder. Your assignment, classified until you're airborne. She accepted it, scanning the first page. Call sign Spectre 1. Team designation, Echo Unit. Objective, humanitarian escort, Eastern Mediterranean, unstable zone. But under that, a handwritten note in Mitchell's tight script. Leadership isn't about being right. It's about staying human when the world forgets how. Sarah folded the paper carefully, tucking it into her pocket. She turned to Mitchell. Will I see you out there? He shook his head. No, this one's yours. She nodded slowly. I'll make you proud. He smiled faintly. You already did. As the engines roared to life, Sarah climbed the ramp, turned once at the door and saluted. Mitchell returned it, a crisp, perfect salute. Then she disappeared inside, swallowed by the machine and the mission. The door closed. The jet rolled forward. And as it lifted into the endless blue, Mitchell stood watching until it vanished into the horizon. He whispered almost to himself, she's her father's daughter through and through. Inside the jet, Sarah stared out the window, watching the clouds drift past. Her reflection stared back, same eyes, same calm. But something deeper now lived there. Not doubt, not pride. Conviction. She pulled back her sleeve slightly, looking at the tattoo once more, the eagle, the anchor, her father's name. For years it had been a secret. Now it was her compass. She pressed a hand to it, closed her eyes and whispered, I'll carry it forward. Outside, the horizon burned gold. The world waited. Why did the rain always seem to fall harder when things mattered most? It was supposed to be a simple extraction. That's what the briefing said. But nothing about this place felt simple. Sarah Martinez stood knee-deep in mud, radio pressed to her ear, voice calm under pressure. Echo Unit, this is Spectre 1. We're pinned on the eastern approach. Need status on the evac point. Spectre 1, this is Miller. Choppers delayed. Visibility's down to 0. 15 minutes minimum. She looked up at the sky, black clouds boiling over the mountains. Rain slamming down so hard it blurred the world into gray streaks. 15 minutes could be forever out here. Behind her, a small convoy of aid workers huddled beneath tarps, terrified but alive. Their transport had been ambushed outside a ruined coastal village, their drivers killed before Echo Unit arrived. Now, Sarah's team had them secured in what used to be a schoolhouse, walls cracked, windows shattered, chalkboard still bearing faint words in a language she couldn't read. She wiped rain from her eyes and turned to Ensign Park, who was working frantically over the signal console. "Any luck?" "Not yet," Park said, frustration biting through exhaustion. "Jammers are stronger than expected. I can boost our frequency, but we'll light up like a beacon." "Do it," Sarah said. "They already know we're here." Park nodded and went back to work. Grier's voice crackled faintly through comms, static-laced but recognizable. "Spectre 1, this is Echo 2. We're closing in from the west, 2 clicks out." Relief flickered, brief but real. "Copy that, Echo 2, keep low, the village is crawling." She lowered her rifle and scanned the horizon again. Movement, shadows in the rain, shapes that didn't move like civilians. They were being hunted. "Martinez," Miller called quietly from inside the building. "One of the locals says there's a shortcut through the ravine behind the ridge. It could get the aid workers to the extraction point faster." She turned. "What's the catch?" "It floods fast," he said. "If the rain keeps up, we'll lose it in under 30 minutes." Sarah looked toward the dark outline of the ravine through the sheets of rain, steep, narrow, barely visible. A gamble, but the only one they had. She keyed her radio. "All Echo units prepare for split movement. Bravo team, secure the civilians and head for the ravine. Alpha with me, will cover the rear." "Copy," came the replies. She crouched beside one of the aid workers, a woman no older than 30, clutching a child to her chest. "Ma'am," Sarah said gently, "we're getting you out. Stay close to the medic. Don't stop no matter what happens behind you. Do you understand?" The woman nodded, tears mixing with rain. Sarah gave her a small, steady smile. "You'll make it." The woman's gaze fell to the tattoo on Sarah's forearm, barely visible through the rain. "What does it mean?" she asked softly. Sarah glanced down. "It's for someone who stayed behind so others could go home." The woman's lip trembled. "Then maybe today you get to go home too." Sarah didn't answer. She just nodded once, then turned and raised her rifle. The first shots came minutes later, a crack through the storm, distant but closing fast. Automatic fire echoed off the ridge. The enemy had found them. "Contact north side," Park shouted. Sarah moved instantly. "Miller, get them moving. Go now." Civilians stumbled into the rain, guided by Bravo team toward the ravine. Sarah and her fire team took up defensive positions behind broken walls and collapsed beams. "2 squads," she muttered, eyes through the scope, "flanking from both sides." "Copy," Park said, chambering around. "We're outnumbered 3-1. "Then make every shot count." The firefight erupted, thunder blending with gunfire, flashes of light in the storm. Sarah moved like clockwork, controlled bursts, calculated rhythm, conserving ammo. Her team fought hard, but the enemy kept advancing, disciplined, coordinated, professional. "Spectre 1, Miller's voice broke through comms. "We've reached the ravine, but it's flooding fast. We need you here now." Sarah ducked as a round shattered the wall beside her. Mud splattered across her face. "Negative," she shouted back. "We'll hold until you're clear." "Sarah." "That's an order." She turned to Park. "Fall back 50 meters. Lay suppressing fire from the west window." He hesitated. "And you?" "I'll buy you time." He hesitated again, then nodded and moved. Sarah reloaded and exhaled slowly. Rain dripped down the barrel of her rifle. The world narrowed to pulse, breath, focus. In the chaos, something shifted, an explosion somewhere downrange, a plume of smoke rising above the trees. Through the haze, she saw movement, an enemy squad flanking along the ridge, right toward the fleeing civilians. Her stomach clenched. "Bravo team, incoming hostiles on your 12. You've got less than 2 minutes." "Too far out," Miller shouted. "We can't get back up the slope." Sarah's mind raced, no time to call artillery, no clear line for air support, comms too unstable. The only way to stop them was from here. She slung her rifle and sprinted through the mud toward the ridge, boots sinking deep, rain slapping her face. The wind howled like a living thing, ripping through the jungle canopy. She climbed fast, slipping, clawing her way upward. When she reached the crest, she dropped to one knee and unslung her rifle again. The enemy squad was less than 200 meters from the ravine. She lined up the shot, breath slow, eyes steady. Exhale. The first round dropped the lead scout. The second, the one behind him. The third caught the gunner mid-stride. She shifted aim again, but a round tore through the dirt inches from her shoulder. Sniper somewhere across the clearing. She rolled behind a fallen tree, heart hammering, breath steadying. The rain was blinding now, visibility near zero. Martinez, Miller's voice in her ear, we're almost clear. Keep moving, she shouted, wiping rain from her eyes. Don't stop. She peered through the scope again, searching for the opposing sniper. Nothing but storm and smoke. Then there, a flicker of movement on the far ridge. She fired. The figure dropped. The world went silent again, except for rain. She let herself breathe for the first time in what felt like forever. Then she keyed her radio. Bravo team status. No response. Static. She tried again. Miller report. Still nothing. Her gut twisted. She slid down the slope, mud caking her uniform, rifle clutched tight. When she reached the ravine, the water was waist-deep and rising fast, a rushing torrent of brown and foam. Miller, she shouted over the roar. He appeared on the opposite bank, waving frantically. We're good, civilians are across, but you need to move now. She started toward him, wading through the current, but halfway across, the ground shifted under her boots. The current caught her, dragging her sideways. Her feet slipped. She hit the water hard. Sarah, Miller screamed. She tried to grab a root, missed, then caught one with her free hand, the current pulling her down. Her rifle vanished beneath the torrent. Every muscle screamed as she held on. The world narrowed to the sound of rushing water and her heartbeat. She clawed her way up, inch by inch, gasping for air. Then a hand reached down through the rain. Miller. He pulled hard. She surfaced, coughing, soaked to the bone. Got you, he panted. They collapsed on the muddy bank, gasping, laughing between breaths that sounded too much like sobs. You're insane, he said. Probably, she replied, but effective. He shook his head, smiling through exhaustion. You just saved 20 people. She looked out over the ravine, the civilians safe on the far side, huddled together, the child waving toward her. Not 20, she said softly, just enough. Hours later, the storm cleared. The evac chopper thundered overhead, its lights cutting through the mist. Sarah helped load the last of the civilians aboard, one by one. When the doors closed, she stood back, watching the rotors kick up wind and dust. Miller came up beside her. You know they'll name this op after you. She shook her head. Names don't matter, lives do. He looked at her for a long moment, then smiled. You sound like Mitchell. She smiled faintly. Maybe he's rubbing off. As the chopper lifted into the sky, Sarah turned toward the horizon, quiet, endless, golden with the first light of morning. Her body ached, her hands were raw, but her heart was steady. For the first time since her father's death, she didn't feel like she was chasing his shadow. She felt like she was walking beside it. Weeks later, back at base, she stood on the observation deck overlooking the ocean. The waves were calm again, sunlight glinting off the water like diamonds. Commander Mitchell joined her, hands clasped behind his back. Heard you made quite an impression out there. I did my job, she said. You did more than that, he replied. You led, and you did it your way. She smiled faintly. You taught me that leadership isn't orders, it's decisions. He nodded slowly. And sometimes it's the quietest ones that echo the loudest. They stood in silence for a while. The sea stretched on forever. Finally she asked, "Sir, do you ever think we'll stop fighting?" Mitchell exhaled, eyes on the horizon. "Maybe not, but people like you remind me why we keep trying." Sarah looked down at her arm, at the tattoo that had once been a scar, now a symbol. She touched it gently, feeling the ink beneath her fingers. "Dad used to say dignity doesn't need to speak," she said softly. "It just acts." Mitchell smiled. "Then you've learned the lesson better than most." The waves crashed softly below them. The wind carried salt, sunlight, and something else, peace. Sarah straightened, shoulders squared, gaze fixed on the endless horizon. The world would keep turning, the storms would keep coming. But wherever duty called, she'd be ready not as her father's daughter, but as her own kind of warrior. Quiet, steady, unbreakable. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.